Good morning, everybody, and please excuse my coughing as I go through the meeting. I seem to have this bug that's going around. I'm Councillor, excuse me, I'm Councillor Ernie Clark, Chairman of the committee, and I will be presiding over the meeting today. Please can I ask that all devices are turned to silent for the duration of the meeting. If there is a fire alarm, please exit the building via the nearest exit and congregate on the grass in front of the building. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast live to the Wiltshire Council YouTube site. All documents pertaining to the meeting can be accessed on the Wiltshire Council website. If this transpires to be a lengthy meeting, I will determine if a break is required. When members of the public leave the meeting, please can I request that you leave your visitor's badge either in the council chamber on the table as you exit the room or with reception. And can I just clarify that I did ask if I could be excused chairing this meeting, or certainly the planning item, but apparently the Constitution doesn't allow me not to act as chairman if I'm in the chamber as a committee member. But I will do my best. Well, in fact, I will ensure that everything is done fairly, and I can assure the applicant that they won't be disadvantaged by my sitting at the chair. Again, I would ask members when I address you if you can pretend that I'm sitting out with you and not sitting here. But that's a bit awkward, so I apologise for that. Can I just confirm with Dem Services that the streaming is live?
Yes, the stream's live. Thank you.
Okay, I will now formally open the meeting. Item 1, apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillor Holder, Councillor Martin Smith, who's been substituted by Councillor Nick Baker, and Councillor Sam, excuse me, and Councillor Sam Blackwell, who's been substituted by Councillor Ruth Hopkinson. Are members or officers aware of any other apologies? Thank you. Minutes of the previous meetings. The meetings, I do apologise. The minutes of the ordinary meeting held on 29th of July 25 and the extraordinary meeting held on 5th of August 25 can be seen in the agenda. Do any members have any corrections to make to these minutes, please? Okay, I will ask that we approve and sign both the minutes with a true and correct record and ask for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Greenman. Those in favour? Thank you. I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of disclosable interest or dispensations granted by the Standards Committee? Okay, I'm afraid the Chairman does have one. And it does go on a little bit, excuse me. Typical when you want the system to work, it doesn't. Right, so it does go on a little bit, but the clerk has got a copy of it, so she knows it's so it will be recorded correctly. This declaration relates to agenda item 7, PL 2023-10559. Sorry. Right, both the courts and legislation recognise that elected councillors are entitled and indeed expected to have and to have expressed their views on a subject to be decided upon by their council. I am aware that it is legitimate for me to be predisposed towards a particular outcome, as long as I am prepared to consider all the arguments and points made about the specific issues under consideration. In addition to being a Wiltshire councillor, I am a member of Hilton Parish Council. Whenever the Parish Council or a committee of the Council has discussed this application, I have refrained from making any comment but have answered any questions to the best of my ability. I have always abstained on any vote relating to this application. Such abstentions are shown in the Council minutes. From what I currently know of this application, I am presently predisposed to object to it. However, I am not predetermined and I maintain an open mind. I will listen to everything said today before reaching my decision on the application. Although I have formed a provisional view towards a particular outcome, I remain prepared to consider and weigh relevant factors in reaching my final decision. Okie dokie. Item 4, Chairman's announcements. I don't believe I have any. Item 5, public participation. I will now summarise how the item to be determined will be debated and how public participation will proceed. Firstly, the planning officer will present their report and explain their recommendation. They may invite comments from other officers if appropriate. I will then ask members of the committee to indicate if they have any technical questions they wish to ask of the officers. We will then proceed to public participation. Up to 3 objectors and 3 supporters were able to register to speak for each item for up to 3 minutes each. Following the public slots for objectors and supporters, there are slots for statutory consultees. We will then hear from the formal representatives from relevant parish councils for up to 4 minutes. After the parish councils, I will then invite the local unitary member, which happens to be me, for the application to speak. And I notice the member for Holt and Staverton is here, so I presume he will wish to speak. I will then open the item to debate. I will ask the first committee member to speak to move a motion which must be seconded. Officer advice may need to be taken in relation to any motion. At the conclusion of the debate, I will then proceed to a vote. Is everything clear? Okie dokie. We'll then move on to item 6, which is planning appeals and updates. It's the appeals received or determined since the last meeting of the committee on the 5th of August can be seen in the agenda pack. Do officers have any comments to make regarding the appeals?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So on page 81 of the agenda pack, there's 2 tables. The first one lists the 3 appeals that this council has received and is undergoing the review of and the defence of those appeals. And we've had 1 appeal decided. And just to remind members of this committee, the only appeals you see for Strategic Planning Committee are those applications that were reported to this committee. It does not include other appeals that were presented to area committees. So this particular table on page 81 for a determined appeal relates to a solar farm application which was presented to this committee last August. Officers recommended it for approval. And the committee overturned that decision and refused it on the grounds of lack of information pertaining to the battery storage details and also landscape harm and biodiversity and some other issues. So the inspectorate, when the appeal was lodged, obviously inspected the reasons for refusal, and the 2 parts to the decision, or the 2 key parts to sort of relay back to members, is that where some matters can legitimately be covered by a planning condition in terms of lack of information relating to battery storage, all I would just remind councillors is that we do have planning conditions available to councils to impose that level of information so that prior to development taking place, the council still has that control mechanism to review information that might not have been submitted with the application up front. So this particular appeal, the inspector, not surprisingly, dismissed that reason for refusal. Now, on the point of the solar farm having landscape harm or ecology harm, the inspector looked at obviously the expert views of Natural England and the council's ecologist who didn't object to the application, and not surprisingly the inspector said well there was no technical reasons to dismiss the appeal on those grounds either. The one area that the inspector did accept there was a legitimate reason for concern was the landscape harm element, but in the balance of things the inspector did not consider that to outweigh the benefits of allowing the solar farm project. So that appeal was allowed, and again it's another lost appeal, I'm afraid, Chairman. So there's some lessons to learn. I would respectfully suggest that when we've got an application presented to committee and it might be missing a few issues, just please remember we do have the ability to impose planning conditions to require those that level of information to come to the council, and we either accept it or we don't. Just to refuse it, it opens up the potential of exposing the council to costs as well as a potential lost appeal. Thankfully, we didn't have a costs award against us for that particular appeal, but we did lose the argument in terms of suggesting that that was a legitimate reason for refusal when the inspector said it wasn't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kenny. Councillor Munns, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Kenny, just a very quick one. Thank you for that. Do you have the original application reference number for that?
I do. So it's on page 81 of the agenda part, but just for clarity, it's PL 2023 10394. And it was land south of Salisbury Road near Homington in Britford Parish.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Kenny on the report? Nope. Okie dokie. With that being completed, move on to item 7. Apologies. Item 7, PL 2023-1055-9, land at Maxcroft Farm, Marsh Road, Hilperton, and I will ask Verity Giles Franklin, Senior Planning Officer, to present the report and recommendation. Verity.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start, I just wanted to update members that I've received 12 late representations on the application, which have been reviewed, and they sort of raise concerns that have already been considered and appraised within the accompanying committee report. So your agenda item 7 in your packs for today. And that there are no further comments that I wish to make regarding the comments that have been raised within those representations. One of the additional representations was from Councillor Beckett on behalf of the Parish Council, which I understand members have also received a copy of directly. The application before members today is seeking outline planning permission with all matters reserved except access for the demolition of the existing farm buildings and the construction of up to 180 dwellings and associated infrastructure, including landscaping, open space, surface water drainage and the internal road network. The proposal includes details of a new access from Marsh Road. The subject site is located outside the settlement boundaries for Hilperton and is not a site that has been identified in the neighbourhood plan or the emerging local plan as an allocated site for housing. But given the significant housing land supply deficit, paragraph 11 of the MPPF requires there to be a holistic planning judgment on the weighted benefits of the proposal versus the harms, which are fully set out within the published committee report. Officers are recommending that the application be approved subject to planning conditions following the completion of the Section 106 legal agreement. The proposal is located north of Hilperton. The site is sort of outlined in red. You can see the canal running to the north, Marsh Lane along the south, with sort of existing residential development to the south and to the west of the site. The site extends 6.27 hectares of predominantly flat agricultural land. There are several listed buildings within 50 metres of the application site, which on this side is shown by the purple dots, which includes Maxcroft House to the west, the King's Arms Public House to the southwest, and numbers 4549 Marsh Road to the east. The application site is located within the yellow zone associated with the Trowbridge and Westbury bat mitigation strategy, which represents a medium risk of habitat loss, with the southern part of the site located in a core roost buffer zone associated with the greater horseshoe bats. Maxcroft Farm is located within flood zone 1, which means it is low risk of flooding from rivers and sea, with the submitted drainage information, which covers and assesses all sources of flooding, confirming that the whole site is at low risk of groundwater and surface water flooding. The site is located approximately 30-minute walk from the town centre, with there being key facilities within 800 metres of the site, including schools, shops and bus stops. It is not considered that future occupiers of the site would have any less access to services or facilities compared to existing neighbouring residents, shown in the homes identified on these slides and the excerpts included within the accompanying report. The Grade 2 listed Maxcroft House, located to the west of the site, has been carefully assessed by planning and conservation officers, and as reported, the development would cause some harm to the wider setting of this listed building. And again, this has been listed as one of the negatives of the scheme, which I'll come on to later. However, in response, the applicant has committed to delivering a robust landscape buffer between the proposed development and Maxcroft House, the details of which would be confirmed at reserved matters stage. Officers have screened the application on DEFRA's Magic Map, which identifies the whole site as being classed as Grade 3B land. The proposal would not, therefore, result in the loss of the best and most versatile agriculture land, which only includes grades 1, 2 and 3A, but not 3B. The applicant has produced this illustrative master plan, which is provided on this slide, which demonstrates how the site could be delivered and laid out. However, this layout is for indicative purposes only, and the access and the principle of the development are the only matters open for consideration at this stage. However, the layout does show where on-site attenuation basins, areas of public open space, and where the three 30-metre ecological buffers along the northern and eastern boundaries would likely be located. The application site is located outside the defined settlement boundary and is therefore in open countryside. However, as the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, paragraph 11D of the NPPF is engaged, which is a material consideration. Whilst Hilberton does have a made neighbourhood plan, it is more than 5 years old and does not allocate land for housing. As such, the NPPF protections referenced within paragraph 11 do not apply. In applying the tilted balance, the key test is whether any adverse impacts of granting planning permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of this 180 house scheme, which shall come on to shortly. The proposal does constitute a development plan departure, with the site not being allocated for housing. However, officers consider the site to be appropriate for delivering housing at a time when the housing land supply is significantly deficient. As set out in the published committee report, the site is considered suitable and capable of accommodating up to 180 dwellings. The application site extends to 6.27 hectares, of which the applicant proposes to develop 3.79 hectares for housing, with the remaining site being allocated to public open space, SUDs, landscaping, and the proposed access and highway infrastructure. For clarity, on this slide, it's the purple areas which are sort of being allocated for the developable part of the site. Based on the proposed site area and on the maximum 180 houses that this outline seeking up to, the resulting density for the whole site would be under 29 dwellings per hectare, which is considered an acceptable density. However, if looking solely at the developable area, the resulting density of around 47 dwellings per hectare, it is noted that the approved Elizabeth Way housing site had a density of 44 dwellings per hectare, so would be consistent with other developments approved in the area. Officers are also mindful of paragraph 130 of the NPPF, which states that council should, and I quote, avoid homes being built at low densities to ensure that developments make optimal use of the potential of each site, which is especially important when councils have a housing land supply shortfall. The applicant has also produced a green and blue infrastructure plan, which is reproduced on this slide, which identifies new landscaping, including a landscape buffer to safeguard existing dwellings, hedgerows and trees, and providing new attenuation basins, as well as showing the translocation of the existing hedge that currently fronts Marsh Road, being put to the north within an area of public open space. In terms of landscape and visual impact, the proposed development would result in the loss of open countryside, and there would be an urbanising impact, which are noted negative impacts. But the proposed development is not isolated and would not appear would appear as a logical expansion of the settlement limits, with existing dwellings to the south and west, the canal and 2 solar farm installations to the north, which in combination has already changed and impacted the character of the area. The submitted landscape and visual impact appraisal concludes that the visual impact would reduce once the applicant's proposed mitigation planting has established, and any residual effects being localised to users of the footpath to the north and Marsh Road to the south. In terms of ecology, the southern boundary hedgerow would be translocated to accommodate the new access, footpath widening works, SUD features, and the hedge to be removed would be relocated and replanted within the site. This plan also shows the applicant's commitment to providing a replacement landscape buffer and wildlife corridor along the southern boundary to provide new bat habitat. The eastern and northern site boundaries would be retained and enhanced with 30-metre buffer zones, with SUDS features being designed as unfenced wetland-style features with native planting. The HRA appropriate assessment concludes that the proposed development would have no adverse effect on the site's integrity. So apart from the principle of development, the only other matter that's open for consideration at this stage is the proposed access. So the development would be served by a new T-junction coming off Marsh Road. So at the moment, there's an existing field access that would be blocked up, and a new T-junction would be formed to serve this application. There would also be widening of the existing footpath along the southern boundary of the site to improve pedestrian and cycle access, with a new pedestrian crossing being secured by the council through the Section 106 developer contributions. There is no evidence that the application would conflict with NPPF paragraph 116, which states that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there is an unacceptable impact on highway safety. This slide is taken from the applicant's design and access statement, which shows the subject site outlined in red with the sort of wider environs, with the lettered icons stipulating and identifying some of the views of the site which are provided on the next two slides. This slide shows a series of photos that reveals different parts of the site, including some well-established landscape boundaries and the existing field access, which is shown in that top right picture. Here are some more views from the site and from the canal. And this photo shows the existing farm buildings, which would be demolished as part of this application, none of which are of any architectural merit. This is a site photograph taken from within the site, looking toward the western boundary. You can sort of make out the petrol station and some of the existing buildings along that western edge. This is, again, a view from within the site, looking northwest, where there's some sort of existing trees and the canal beyond that. This is a view from the north of the site facing south. And this is a view from the canal facing along the northern boundary of the site. This image shows the existing petrol station along Marsh Road and the existing mini roundabout. The King's Arms pub is just sort of shown to the right of that photo. The proposal seeks to widen the existing footpath along this southern boundary adjacent to Marsh Road, with the proposed T-junction sort of being further up the road, sort of to the east of the existing mini roundabout. This is the view of the existing field access off Marsh Road. And again, this shows the southern site frontage of the site. As set out in the report, the application site is located outside the defined settlement boundary and is an open countryside. Therefore, the proposal does not accord with the current development plan. However, as the council cannot demonstrate a five-year land housing supply, paragraph 11D of the NPPF is engaged, which is a very material planning consideration. Whilst Hilberton has a made neighbourhood plan, it is more than 5 years old and does not include any allocated housing sites, and as such, the protections set out in NPPF paragraph 14 do not apply in this instance. In applying the tilted balance, the key test is whether the adverse impacts of granting planning permission will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And in this case, officers argue that the tilted balance falls in favour of supporting the application. Just to summarise, the benefits of the scheme have been identified on this slide. So with regards to the benefits of the proposal, the application is seeking outline planning permission for up to 180 dwellings, which merits very substantial weight and would comprise a development that would make a significant impact in addressing the housing land supply deficit. The applicant's commitment to deliver 30% affordable housing would meet unmet need and is afforded substantial weight. The sustainable location of the development and the site being adjacent to the existing settlement boundary with good access to services and public transport links are also afforded significant weight. The economic benefits of the scheme through construction jobs and local spending are given moderate weight. A moderate weight is given to the Section 106 contributions to secure public open space, play areas, biodiversity net gains and public highway improvements. Turning to the adverse benefits, it is appreciated that there would be turning to the adverse impacts of the scheme, it is appreciated that there would be conflict with the development plan, with the site being located outside the settlement boundary on an unallocated site. This is given moderate weight. The loss of the existing open greenfield site and the localised landscape impact of the loss of agricultural land is afforded moderate weight. The proposal would also result in less than substantial harm to the nearby Grade 2 listed building, Maxcroft House, to the west. However, the layout of the proposed development is not yet fixed, and the applicant is committed to setting housing away from the western boundary near the listed building, which would result in any harm being at the lower end of the scale. To conclude, the application before the committee is an outline application with all matters apart from access being reserved. Therefore, the specific details relating to the appearance, landscaping, scale and outline layout are not matters open for consideration today, as these would form part of a future reserved matter application. Section 106 obligations are set out in the agenda report, and these have been agreed with the applicant to secure the affordable housing, improvements to the local public transport network, rights of way, including improvements to the canal towpath, ecology and education. In applying the tilted balance in this case, officers submit that the adverse impacts of granting planning permission do not outweigh the benefits of the proposal, particularly through the significant delivery of new homes and affordable housing provision. Accordingly, it is recommended that outline planning permission be granted following the completion of a Section 106 legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you, Verity. Excuse me. Thank you, Verity, for a very sort of adequate, not taking too long. Can I ask members of the committee, are there any technical questions for the officer? Oh, excuse me. Councillor Baker, sorry.
Thank you for that really helpful presentation. One of the representation letters which you just mentioned refers particularly to the issue of flood risk and the possibility of this premises, this development, exacerbating flood risk to surrounding properties and also possibly to the road bridge where they talk about flooding, and they reference Para 170 of the MPPF. Could you just tell me whether any assessment has been taken of that risk and what your approach is to that argument?
Thank you. I can confirm that our drainage department have reviewed all the submitted flood risk information, and they are confident that the site can be delivered without causing any flooding off-site, and considers that there would be no sort of technical reasons from their point to refuse the application. A robust drainage strategy has been conditioned as part of the suggested suite of conditions for this application, and our drainage team are confident that the site can be delivered without causing sort of any off-site issues to any existing properties or to the road.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Newbury.
Thanks, Chair. There's quite an interesting point on page 143, which is about the National Health Service asking for some money, and this not meeting the test of the High Court case that's quoted there. I mean, that's a very old High Court case, 1995. It seems hard to believe that the hospitals for 30 years have not been aware of that case. I mean, is it sort of sheer incompetence by the Royal United Hospital that it's asking for money that it hasn't given the appropriate evidence for, or what is going on here? I don't remember this point coming up before.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I can't comment on what the NHS are aware of in terms of court rulings, but they should be aware that when it comes to planning applications, there needs to be 3 tests met for any contributions. And when it comes to health service related contributions, we need to have a dedicated capital project. So if members can cast their minds back who were sitting on this committee for Warminster Urban Extension, we had a capital project in terms of the local GP practices potentially being expanded. Now, since that decision was made, there's only one GP practice, but we still have a capital project aligned to the Section 106. For this case, the NHS have never given a capital project. They've just said, we would like a sum of in excess of £100,000. And quite frankly, that just does not meet the tests when it comes to contributions. So there is a failure. Whoever produced that response, as a council, we can only go so far in terms of communicating to consultees, getting a response that requires a certain level of detail. And in this case, they've failed what the SIL regulations require in terms of MPPF, sets out the 3 legal tests, and the request fails in terms of that quite aged but still relevant court ruling. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks, Kenny. That certainly makes it clearer. Many thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? Okie doke. I'm afraid the local member, i.e. me, has got one or two. Firstly, hopefully as a highways officer, either here or online, I've been told by the planning officers that we can't go for any refusal on traffic grounds because highways have not objected. I was just wondering if somebody could explain how, with the bridge at Staverton classed as red, i.e. being at capacity, and a video that I was sent, which I've forwarded to other members of the committee, that a local resident took of a sort of 1.5 mile traffic jam along the B3105. Why is there no reference to this in the report, please?
If I could bring in Mark Wiltshire, who represents the Council's Local Highways Authority at this point, because Mark's team would have looked at the transport assessment and the impacts of this development on the local network. Mark, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologise that I'm not in the council chamber, that I'm at home. The situation with this development is that it's 180 dwellings. You have a situation where that would generate round about 90 to 100 vehicle trips in each peak hour. If you consider the location of the development, those trips are distributed over, as they enter and leave the site, over 3 roads. You have Marsh Lane, you have Canal Road, you have the road that you're referring to into Staverton. So the distribution towards Staverton in a peak hour is actually reasonably low, because you're talking about a distribution of around about 30 trips in that direction in the peak hour. Some of those, of course, are going in both the other directions. So some are coming into the site, some are actually going out of the site. So the situation is that the amount that actually adds to the queue as you head towards the Staverton Bridge is not sufficient that we would consider it you could object or justify any objection to this application, because the capacity assessments show that the addition to that queue is quite minimal given the length of the queue. You're talking about literally adding a small amount of vehicles to it. So something like 7 or 8 vehicles being added to the queue. That is not something that we would consider that you could justify an objection on. So just to emphasise, you've got to remember you've got a choice of 3 routes that you could enter and leave in a 90 level of trips split between those 3 routes is not taking that situation at Staverton to a level of concern. The other thing, of course, is that we are seeking financial contributions as part of the 106. We consider that improving the local infrastructure, that widening the footpaths towards Staverton, towards the primary schools, it all helps to actually, with a robust travel plan, it all helps to reducing the amount of trips that the development would generate below that level, because the 90 trip level that I mentioned is very much a worst case. That's a very robust assessment in the transport assessment. With those additional improvements, travel plan, all that sort of thing, the level of trip should actually come down from that. So that's our position.
Okay, thank you. So basically you're saying the traffic jams are so bad that adding another few cars to it won't make any difference in your opinion?
Not to the, you're correct. I mean, that is correct. It's not a very satisfactory situation there, but you have to look at the amount that this development will add to that jam, and the number of vehicles it will add to it is such that we don't think it is a significant thing.
I could just add, The NPPF nowadays sets out a very clear direction to local planning authorities when we've got applications to be determined and there's potentially an issue for highway concerns or highway safety. And paragraph 116 makes it very clear that to councils that we should only be refusing applications when we've got the evidence to justify a highway-based reason for refusal. And paragraph 9.8.1 of the report, and then it leads on to 9.8.2, sets out that paragraph, and I'll read it out. NPPF 116 sets out clearly that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network following mitigation would be severe, taking into account all reasonable future scenarios. So you've just heard from Mark Wiltshire identify that as part of this recommendation, we would be securing mitigation in the form of developer contributions to reduce the impacts on the network. So it's not, with respect, Chair, officers are saying that we don't see a problem along the highway network. We're just making it very clear that the government and the NPPF makes it very clear that for councils to be able to sustain a refusal at appeal, we would need to have the evidence to show that a impact would be unacceptable, or it would be cumulatively unacceptable in terms of road safety or the operation of the network. And as Mark his team have looked at the scenarios, there is no just one direction for vehicles to travel in. There are 3 or more options in terms of travel movement. So just as a reminder, paragraph 116 makes it very clear to councils that we should not be refusing highway related matters unless we've got a very strong case to defend. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. I've only got 4 questions. I'll move on to my second one. On page 99, and it was in one of your slides, you've got the boundary that you say is between Trowbridge and Hilperton. I was just wondering if you could explain how the Trowbridge comes into it, because these houses that you're showing there are actually in Staverton Parish.
So, sorry, Chair, just to clarify, are you talking about the houses to that are sort of shown on the east of that slide, west of that slide?
The houses that's to the west of the Kennet Oven Canal are in Staverton Parish.
It might be because they fall within the wider Trowbridge settlement boundary, and then Hilberton to the other side of the canal.
Okay, so you're saying it may be because of the wider settlement boundary, but those houses are in Staverton Parish, are they not?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Third question. The southern, if I call it Batt area, includes the existing back gardens for the houses in Marsh Road, and it's going to be broken by the access road, which I'm not quite sure how that works. But more to the point, how can the council prevent existing residents from, if they wish to, fitting floodlights to their rear gardens, and thus making that area of the sort of back mitigation bit absolutely useless? If they're the existing houses, we can't do anything about it, can we?
So as part of this application, that there are sort of conditions that have been imposed for us to sort of agree any sort of new lighting across the site and along that southern boundary. So from our point of view and from what the ecologist has advised, that there would be an upgrade to the lighting and street lighting along the southern boundary. So overall the impacts and lighting levels along that road would be an enhancement to the area for commuting back with sort of old fittings being replaced with LED lighting. In terms of existing residents, I mean, it sort of depends. I mean, if they're planning to proposing some sort of flood lighting, again, depending on the height of what they're wanting to do, etc., it may require planning permission. But otherwise, there's sort of, depending on whether it falls within PD or not, there's little that we can do to sort of restrict the lighting that existing residents might want outside. all we can do is try and ensure that the application is sort of carried out in a way that we consider to be acceptable and to ensure that it wouldn't have an impact on bat habitat.
So if the existing applicants or the existing residents along Marsh Road, as long as it doesn't need planning permission, there's absolutely nothing this council can do to stop people lighting their gardens and making that sort of southern corridor basically ineffective.
I guess not unless it becomes a nuisance, in which case it would be an issue that would be investigated.
Thank you. So basically, yes, they can light it. Final question. How will the southern footpath be widened in front of the existing houses? So I've heard the officer speak about sort of going northwest from the site, but how about the footpath going southeast? Because the pavement is only, what, metre and a bit wide, and the road's only just wide enough for sort of parked car and a passing vehicle.
So this slide shows where the blue line is, and apologies if it's not very clear, but that sort of shows where the visibility displays would be, and then sort of behind that it shows where the sort of widening works would be, with the sort of the black line that sort of runs sort of quite close to the visibility display lines. So again, we can only increase the width of the footpath sort of along the site frontage, and it would be then tying in with the existing footpath in both directions, but across the site frontage, that's where we have been able to secure sort of the widening works to improve pedestrian access.
Thank you. And leading on from that, on the map it shows sort of stuff that's accessible within, I think it's a 30-minute walk. What's been proposed for getting to Holt? Because once you go over Staverton Bridge, because it's shown, I think it's in the purple area, there's no footpaths and no street lighting. It's basically country lanes. Is anything going to be done about that?
I know that contributions have been agreed with the applicant to sort of improve wayfinding and to improve sort of existing sort of infrastructure. I don't think Holt specifically has been sort of quoted as needing sort of upgrade works, but again, Section 106 funding has been agreed to sort of improve the wider network and to improve sort of cycle access and pedestrian access to and from the site.
Thank you. I think that probably means no. Are there any other questions before we go to members of the public? No. Okay, we'll now go to public participation. What I intend to do, normally I will call people, time them and tell them when their 3 minutes or 4 minutes is up. Again, in order to ensure that there's sort of no slippage on my part as chairman, Tara will be doing the timing to ensure that everything's done correctly. So I'll hand this over to you, Tara.
Okay, so first up we have Celia Beckett, please. You've got 3 minutes, yeah.
Good morning. My name's Celia Beckett and I'm the chair of the Hilperton Area Action Group, which is a working group of the Hilperton Parish Council. I'm not a parish councillor. I wish to raise some of the key issues in relation to this application. You will have had the opportunity to read our letter, so I'll just briefly speak to some of our concerns. As a community, we see this proposed development not in isolation, but as part of a wider plan to create an urban extension of Trowbridge beyond Hilperton as part of the broad locations of future growth in the local plan. When Elizabeth Way was agreed, it was suggested that this would be a boundary for the Trowbridge's eastern development. This proposed site is an urban, densely built development in a rural area, part of an important wildlife area which should be being protected by the Wiltshire Nature Recovery Project. The planned extension of Trowbridge leapfrogs beyond the Hilperton settlement boundary. The plan is for high-density housing in an area with poor accessibility and transport systems. A recent assessment of the housing numbers suggests that the Trowbridge housing market area needs are less than anticipated. The plan is not sustainable. It includes no infrastructure, no primary school, preschool or convenience store. Cycleways and footpaths are not readily accessible from the development, and it will not be the obvious choice for commuters travelling outside the area. Inevitably, it will therefore increase traffic through the village towards Trowbridge and Staverton. The justification is the 5-year land supply, and yet in a matter of months, this will not be an issue. We are aware that beyond the local plan, there will be further pressures for more housing, but you will have had the benefit of the inspector's view on the appropriateness of development in this area. If it does go ahead, it should be subject to a master plan to ensure the protection of the endangered bats and other wildlife and necessary infrastructure. It also needs to have appropriate consideration of the flood risks to the neighbouring properties and the need to protect heritage aspects. We have been campaigning for over 4 years to defend our community and protect it from unsustainable development. Our arguments are evidence-based and should be taken seriously. Our objection is based on size and location of the development, which is unsustainable. This development would be far more appropriate in a more urban location, which would be more sustainable and closer to essential services. The strength of feeling in the community is considerable. Our Facebook page has over 800 members, and people are incredulous at the possibility of this degree of development on such an unsuitable site. We would urge the committee to make a site visit to see firsthand the access difficulties before making a decision. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Celia. So next up we have Robert Turrell.
Good morning, councillors. I speak today as someone who lives immediately beside this site where the proposed build area comes hard up against my property. My privacy, loss of light and the basic amenity of my home appear to be completely ignored in these plans, and there should be a large buffer zone to separate us from the development. There is no buffer zone at all, it's zero. I know my builder had to jump through hoops for just one house, yet 180 houses are now being proposed, many more than normal planning guidelines for the size of area. Why is this? I ask. Since moving to Maxcroft in January, I've been amazed by the richness of the wildlife, the bats at dusk, wildfowl on the canal, deer and ponies grazing in the fields. It is part of what makes this such a special place to live. To lose this to a dense housing estate would be devastating. The inspector's own report highlighted contradictions in the scheme, as yet they have not been addressed. It is an ill-conceived plan beyond true boundary of the village and risks eroding what makes Hilberton Marsh unique. There should be safeguards. There should be safeguards to protect spaces like this, particularly the wetlands and this historic stretch of the canal. Instead, we are faced with 180 houses crammed up against buildings, gardens, and against natural corridors that sustain wildlife. With so many other houses already planned for the area, it really does not make sense to press ahead here. It sadly smells of money over common sense. I urge you, councillors, to reject this application and stand up for the residents and wildlife and the character of our village. Thank you.
Okay, next we have David Solomon, please.
Good morning, councillors. My name is David Solomon and I live in Hilperton. Like many here and many other local residents, I am deeply concerned about what is being proposed for Maxcroft Farm. First and foremost, the threat to wildlife cannot be overstated. The canal corridor, the hedgerows and the open fields are home to bats, wildfowl and other protected species. This is a landscape that should be safeguarded, not sacrificed to yet another housing estate. Second, the traffic. Marsh Road and the village lanes are already struggling with congestion and safety issues. Adding hundreds more car journeys will only worsen the situation, putting children, cyclists and pedestrians at greater risk. Third, the quality of what is being built. We only have to look at the recent Barratt developments nearby. Dense, characterless, and frankly poor in design. Do we really want more of the same right on the edge of our village? And then there is the flooding. Residents know that these fields and ditches take an awful lot of water during heavy rain. Paving them over and discharging into culverts that are already under strain is asking for trouble. Finally, this is about principle. Matchcoff Farm sits beyond the village boundary. If you allow 180 houses here, what message does it send? Where does it stop? The green edges that define Hilperton will be gone piece by piece. I urge you not to let short-term profit win over long-term community sense. Please reject this scheme and protect both our village and its environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Zoe Mason, please.
Good morning. My name is Zoe Mason and I'm a planning consultant at Lichfields, acting on behalf of the applicant. We have been discussing this application with your officers and consultees for over 2 years. We would like to thank all those who've been involved. The outcome is a well-designed scheme that will deliver much-needed housing without any adverse impacts on ecology, trees, archaeology, highways, rights-of-way, residential amenity, flooding or drainage. The report prepared by your officer is thorough. It fully assesses all the relevant issues and reaches a very clear conclusion that planning permission should be granted. The applicant acknowledges that any development of this site will have landscape impacts, and there will also be low-level harm to the setting of Grade 2 listed Matchcroft House, though there is no objection from the council's conservation officer. In both cases, impacts have been mitigated by planting and the retention and enhancement of green corridors. Your officer's report clearly explains that this proposal will result in a wide range of benefits, notably the delivery of 180 homes, including 54 affordable homes, which will assist in addressing a chronic housing shortfall. Provision has been made for green 30-metre buffers, dark corridors and sud features, which are all functional for bats and will deliver benefits for biodiversity. The design of these features is in accordance with the Trowbridge and Westbury bat mitigation strategy, and there is no objection from the council's ecologist or Natural England. The proposal also incorporates measures to improve pedestrian and cycle accessibility, including widening of the footpath on the Marsh Road frontage and financial contributions towards a zebra crossing, public rights-of-way upgrades and canal towpath improvements. There is no objection from the council's highways officer, rights-of-way officer or the Canal and River Trust. There will also be financial contributions towards local education and sports facilities, as well as significant SIL receipts. A Section 106 agreement has already been drafted. Other benefits include job creation, increased expenditure in the local economy, and reprofiling of the site, which will deliver improvements to surface water drainage. The proposal has been through a very thorough consultation process. Aside from landscape, there are no objections from any council officers or statutory consultees. There have been objections from neighbours and parish councils, but many of the comments have been addressed by amendments or are contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework. We understand that the council continues to wrestle with difficult issues around housing supply. This scheme can make a real contribution and deliver new homes in the next 5 years. This is a very significant benefit, which sits alongside other benefits for the economy, accessibility and biodiversity. We are pleased that your officer is recommending this application for approval. We ask that members endorse the benefits of this proposal and support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bang on. Oops. Okay, Andrew Penner, please.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Penner from Barratt Bristol. We are the proposed developer for the site. I just wanted to echo Zoe's comments in thanking the officer team. It's been a team effort over the last 2 years, lots of work together in bringing forward this application. Just to confirm that the Section 106 agreement is travelling between the legal solicitors, and again, thanks to the legal team at Wiltshire for progressing the agreement. We are hopefully very close to getting that document signed, and this site, as Zoe says, will make a genuine contribution. We are keen to get on site and get building. Just a couple of points to pick up that have been raised by members of the public and by councillors. On the flood risk side, we are aware that there's an existing culvert at the back of the properties along the road frontage, and that has caused some local flooding. Our scheme will pick up that culvert. We've also done a CCTV study of the culvert as it passes under the road. We believe that the drainage scheme for the site will actually result in a betterment to the surface water drainage issues in the local area. On the issue of the back corridors, they're designed to be wide enough on both sides so as to not be affected by light from either new or existing properties. That's a condition of the work we did with Natural England and the council's ecologist. On public rights of way, there is a significant sum of money that's been set aside for contributions to public rights of way. The details of that will be discussed in further detail, but clearly that allows for a wide-ranging package of improvements to the local footpath network. Finally, just to say that the wider North Hilperton proposals that have been referred to, we are not part of those proposals. That is a different company promoting a development in excess of something like 2,000 new homes. We have no connection with that company. And as the plan shows, the area of land immediately to the east of this site, the long, thin strip of land there is in third-party ownership. Our plan allows for no connection across there in vehicular terms. So there's no suggestion this is providing an access into wider land to the east. I would echo Zoe's comments in asking you to support the proposals which deliver much needed housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so next we have Nick Woodall from Staverton Parish Council, please.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you, Chair. I am Nick Woodall, Chairman of Staverton Parish Council, which is not in Hilperton Parish Council. We are the land to the north and west of the canal, incorrectly labelled as Trowbridge. Thank you, Chair, for pointing that out. I'm no expert in highways or flooding. I'm just someone who lives in Staverton and talks to people who live in Staverton who all have to cope with the problems. The B3105 is one of 2 northerly roads crossing the River Avon to large employment areas like Chippenham, Swindon, Bristol, Bath. It is a very busy road. At the best of times, it moves reasonably well. At the worst of times, it is completely snarled up. There are 3 schools about 400 metres north of that picture, with people coming from quite far and wide, dropping off children, most of them using cars. There is Serial Partners in the village, which has large HGV traffic movements going in and out of the village at all times of the day. There are extra HGV traffic movements due to the weight limit of Bradford-on-Avon and the weight limit of Cleveland Bridge in Bath. All these vehicles now come through Staverton and Hilperton. The new designation by government of the A350 as the north-south traffic route for HGVs has also had an effect on us because basically HGVs use us as a shortcut because it's a slightly less mileage route than the A350. When it is busy, the traffic is so bad that the pedestrian crossing has traffic backing up over it. I know this because 6 years ago, I almost watched my 6-year-old get run over by an HGV running over that pedestrian crossing because he couldn't see it because of the traffic. The only time that this road is quiet is when the Avon floods. The Avon floods pretty regularly and is getting more regular and more frequent. I imagine this is because property developers are building on the ground that actually absorbs the water and regulates the water into rivers and therefore controls the flooding. We object to this planning because it affects us, and at no time in their application have they given us in Staverton, the neighbouring parish, any mitigation, any ideas about how they're going to help this traffic flow. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Councillor Bill Bailey of Hilperton Parish Council, please.
Good morning. On behalf of Hilperton Parish Council, I confirm our opposition to the application for 180 dwellings at Maxcroft Farm. While we acknowledge the pressures and housing needs, historically Hilperton has already absorbed substantial development. We just want to ensure that any future development in our parish is needed and it enhances the environment for all our residents. On the report, if Wiltshire had a 5-year land supply, this development would have been refused by the officers. It fails to address the wider community issues, it only focuses on the site. It must be scrutinised in detail now, as reserved matters are rarely refused if they meet the conditions later. It is contrary to numerous core policies, the MPPF and the Neighbourhood Plan. Firstly, this application conflicts with core policies 1, 2 and 29. It's outside of the settlement boundary, not in the neighbourhood plan, and does not against its core objectives. The officers have acknowledged this. Secondly, housing supply. Wiltshire's land supply is a temporary issue. Future allocations through the new plan will restore the 5-year supply as confirmed in the Council's own briefing note. Hilperton and Trowbridge is already set to deliver over 3,000 new homes, which are plan-led sites. This makes the local housing supply at 6.5 years, which is well within the NPPF requirements. This is not the right time for this development. Thirdly, density. Density of 47 dwellings per hectare is excessive for a rural edge site. National average is around 30, which would make 110 homes. Other infill developments in the village are between 16 and 20 DPH. An exact example of this is a recent application of houses at land north of Devizes Road in Hilperton, which was at 33 DPH, and this was refused. Core policy of ours, high quality, local and responsive design that protects the landscape. How do we know this application does it, as we have no detailed design? Fourthly, heritage and environment. The Council's Conservation Officer agrees this development will cause harm to Maxcroft House. The existing site contributes heavily to the village rural character. The Council's Landscape Officer identifies lasting negative impacts. On the bat surveys, we recorded 14 different types of bat species, all 4 Annex 2 bats, and over 166,000 recordings on this site. This development will cause serious harm to the ecology of this area. The habitat gain is only at 1.94% instead of the 10% requirement. 5, flooding. Flooding is a real concern, as flooding has occurred 7 times in the past 2 years and is getting worse. It will increase flooding issues upstream. The site of Hilperton Marsh is always waterlogged naturally, as it acts as a natural attenuation tank for the back part of the village. If you disturb this natural watercourse, where will the water go? It will cause additional flooding. This is not being accounted for anywhere in the drainage scheme. The SUD system will be compromised by the ground conditions. Highways, traffic, this will cause additional and unsustainable pressure on the B3105, which is already congested. Already Staverton Bridge is a pinch point and is regularly closed due to flooding. The extra 3,700 homes already planned will add to these issues. This is not mentioned anywhere. Walking distances are long, no safe routes to Trowbridge. Footpaths are not safe, and this development does very little to improve them. The residents will be car dependent. In conclusion, the community has spoken, over 300 comments with all the local parishes against it. It conflicts with local and national policy.
Okay, can you
threatens
wind
our
up now? You've
landscape
got your time.
and heritage, ecology and environment. Please, can I just ask you, the committee, to review this application at this time? Thank you.
Okay, thank you to members of the public, the developers and the parish councils for their contributions, which I'm sure everybody's listened to carefully. I notice that Councillor Carbine is with us, who represents both Staverton and Holt parishes. Do you wish to speak now, Trevor? The floor is yours.
Right, thanks. Okay, so just a few points, really. I think you've heard from Hilperton and from Staverton and from the Hilperton Action Group. I don't think I need to repeat what's been said there. If the committee chooses to refuse this one, that would be fine. If the committee chooses to go for a site visit, that would also be fine. I want to sort of concentrate really on the scenario where perhaps the committee is going to consider approving the application, but to think about the mitigation that we would need, because I would say that it's inadequate at the moment, what's proposed. So we see the Holt objection on page 103 of the agenda, the Staverton objection on page 104. Holt are pointing out that this would also have an increase on the traffic through Holt itself. And they again refer to the flooding problem on the B3106. And they ask that should the proposal be approved, closure of the B3106 to vehicles and construction of a roundabout at the junction of the B3105 and 3107 should be made with costs met by the developer. And in case people aren't clear about the road numbers, the B3106 is the short road which runs alongside the river directly between Staverton and Holt. The B3105 is the one which comes through Hilperton and along what we call the causeway. It's called the causeway because it's raised slightly above the floodplain up to Forwards Common. And the B3107 is the road it meets there, which comes out of Holt. Staverton, have, as you've heard, have objected and expressed grave concerns. They point out there's no plan to deal with the traffic and the flooding, and that's the key point, I think, here. We as a council have no plan to deal with the problems that you've heard about. We could have one, it wouldn't be difficult, and that's kind of what I'm angling towards, that maybe we could do something about all that stuff. And again, as you've heard, the Staverton point out that the B3105 is now a congested pinch point, regular flooding, closing Staverton as an access at times, and we've heard the reasons why that's an increasing problem. What I want to do, perhaps, Chairman, is pick out a few points from the report, and then I'll try to make sense of it all. Just one point on page 105, it refers to the education, and it says a new nursery has opened within in a 2-mile walking distance of the site. I'm not sure where this new nursery is, but clearly it's 2 miles away, so obviously all the people from the development are going to walk their children those 2 miles, aren't they? I think the objection is so obvious to that I don't really need to spell it out any further. We've also heard from Kenny, he's quoted the NPPF. Yeah, development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there will be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network following mitigation will be severe, taking into account all reasonable future scenarios. What I would say there, Chairman, is if we don't mitigate, yes, the impact would be severe. So we have the choice again, do we want to refuse because of the severe impact, which is quite tricky, or if you're going for refusal for permission, can we maybe get into a scenario where we do have mitigation, which would improve the development as well as the environment for local residents? We've seen on page 131 the concern about the position of bus stops, which would again, the officer says, likely to lead future occupiers of the housing at the site potentially relying on the use of private vehicles. And I think, again, we can assess how great that potential would be, especially as the bus service past the site is not particularly good. The maps, there's a map on page 132, which I think is absolutely brilliant. I love this map. It shows that you can walk in 30 minutes from the site to Holt. And yeah, you can. There's lots of things you can do. Whether people do or not, well, they don't, basically. If you can find anybody who's walked from Hilperton or from Staverton through to Holt, you'd be doing very well. It doesn't happen. People don't do it. And the reason they don't do it is that it's a really unattractive route. You have to walk on a busy main road with no footpath and obviously no lighting at night. I see on the subject of footpaths, there's quite an interesting point about that map. If you look at it carefully, you'll see that Holt has quite an intricate footpath network. These are the little green lines. but at no point does any of those green lines connect to Staverton. There's a complete gap through there, so it's not possible to walk by a public footpath from Holt to Staverton, despite the villages only being less than half a mile apart. As I say, if you're going to walk it, you have to walk along the road, and if you try that, well, as I say, it's not something which normal people do. Perhaps those who are high on adrenaline might like to give it a try sometimes. So I certainly welcome the 230,000 that were given by the Section 106 for off-site accessibility improvements. That talks about improving and widening the existing footway northwest of the Canal Bridge towards Staverton and the schools. But again, we come up with this problem where okay, we might get a few yards of nice footpath, but then you're back onto the narrow, broken up footpath with traffic thundering past your ear hole that you get when you do walk along this. Footpaths in Staverton are very narrow. If we're going to talk about improving the sustainability, improving the walkability of this, we really would need to do something serious about the footpaths, not make token gestures. The flooding point has been referred to. Let's come back to that. The B3106, again, that's a short road, is immediately beside the river. It's very close to the river, even at normal river levels. It's the first road to flood in Wiltshire when the Avon comes up. We probably lose at least 10 or 20 days a year due to flooding on that road. The 3105 causeway floods less often because it is raised above the floodplain. We only lose maybe 1 or 2 days a year on average on that one. When the 3106 is flooded, though, it does have an impact in that all the traffic is obviously going on the causeway. And because it can't turn very easily at the Forwards Common Junction, we then get huge tailbacks coming back into the flooded area by the Nestle factory. When the 3105 does flood, and again, as I say, it's less often, but it does happen increasingly often these days, then what that does is send all the traffic through Bradford and causes severe problems in Bradford-on-Avon. So where's the plan to mitigate all these problems? We've got the high volume of traffic, we've got inadequate footways and pavements, we've got inadequate junctions causing congestion, we've got flooding causing chaos at times. We also have the Elizabeth Way developments, and they were supposed to have provided some Section 106 funding towards highways in this area, towards highways improvements. As far as I know, that hasn't been spent, so there's presumably money in the kitty somewhere that could be added to what we get from the current development. And it's not even particularly difficult or particularly expensive. I think the parishes are not asking for much. A few improvements here or there, a slightly increased contribution in the way of Section 106 money from this development could go a long way to improving some of these problems and giving us a plan to resolve the issues which say will get worse. We're chucking another bale of hay on the camel's back with this one. At some point, the whole system is going to collapse. This is an opportunity for us to do something about it, and I very much hope that the committee will seize that opportunity and take a bit more cash off the developers in the way of Section 106 in order to achieve that. This is a premium site. It's a canal side rural development. It'll attract a premium price on the houses that are sold, so it wouldn't do any harm at all to have some of that going back into the community. Oh yeah, there was one other point I wanted to mention. That's going back to that map just after that. It says paragraph 9810, page 132. Officers acknowledge that there would likely be some reliance on the use of private vehicles in order to access facilities and services. However, it's noted that there are existing nearby dwellings to the west and south of the application site which currently experience the same access to services, and this site is no less sustainable than those existing local dwellings. I think if you accept that argument that sustainability depends on what's there already, and if there already is not sustainable, then okay, we can build other not sustainable developments. It kind of torpedoes the whole concept of sustainability as an argument in planning, Chairman. So I think really we do need a more mature approach to what we're doing with this application. You've heard about the problems. You have the opportunity to do something about it, and I very much hope that you will. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Carvin. I will ask the officers to respond to any points. While they're composing their responses, I'm just going to call a quick 5-minute adjournment. Please excuse me. Okay, sorry about that, but I think several people found comfort from it. Okay, so we resume the meeting, and I will ask the officers to respond to any points made under public participation. And over to Kenny and the case officer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've just got a few points to come back on, if I may. Regarding the housing land supply situation. So following changes to the MPPF in December of last year, the council has moved away from a figure of sort of around 2,000 homes per annum that is expected to provide to 3,500 homes per annum, which has resulted in a 84% increase to the number of homes compared to previous calculations. And that is not sort of a county, that is not like a local community based issue. It's a county-wide situation, and therefore the council needs to improve its land housing supply, and is also required to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply with a 5% buffer, which the council can't currently show. At the moment, it's a figure of 2.42, so quite short of the requirement that we're now expected to provide. And with that, in terms of the density issue, it is accepted that the density that this proposal is seeking to provide is acceptable and is in comparison with other approved developments. And the MPPF is quite clear, as I previously mentioned during this presentation, that it's paragraph 130 of the MPPF, and I quote that where there is an existing or anticipated shortage of land for meeting identified housing need, it is especially important that planning policies and decisions avoid homes being built at low densities. So therefore, we need to make sure that developments are making the optimal use of any potential site. And also just on that land housing supply situation, a briefing note that was published earlier this year included sort of a bit of an action plan of how the council is looking to try and restore a better land housing supply. And it said that it encourages the applications that are outside defined settlement boundaries that have the opportunity to improve the land housing supply situation should be looked upon more favourably. In this instant, the application, as Zoe has previously said, has gone through various rounds of consultation with all the relevant consultees, and that there are sort of no substantial reasons to refuse the application. Turning to the flood risk issue, I know about the existing culverts, and our drainage department are also aware of the culverts around the site. They've also assessed the application on all sources of flooding. And it's been assessed by them that the flood risk can be safely managed on site, and a condition, which is condition 13 on page 148 of your agendas, is considered to be sufficient to cover all the sort of other additional information that would need to sort of accompany a discharge of conditions or reserved matters application. And that condition requires a submission of a robust drainage strategy, which again would come at a later stage once the layout of the site is known and the other sort of outstanding reserved matters have been, the information relating to those has been submitted. So on that basis, there are no technical drainage concerns with the application, and it's considered that that condition would be sufficient to address the outstanding drainage information. With regards to ecology, again, buffer zones have been agreed and have been incorporated within the parameters plan, which show 30 metres along the northern and eastern boundaries, and within those areas there would be no development. So again, that would offer some protection to the existing bat habitat, and would ensure that there would be no development taking place in those areas. And also it's important to mention that the site is not covered by any designated landscape designation and does not represent best and most versatile agricultural land. Again, from a sort of a highways point of view, I appreciate that there are sort of wider issues with the road network in this area, but again, we can only limit kind of the impact of this development within that sort of wider network. And again, the applicant has agreed to various Section 106 contributions to cover sort of off-site accessibility improvements and to also improve the existing rights of way, contribution towards the widening of over 700 metres of the canal footpath has been agreed, in addition to creating a new bridleway connection. So again, the applicant has agreed to making those improvements to the wider network.
Just as a follow-up, Chair, and just following on from what you've heard from Verity, we've heard from the developer, and it is quite unusual that we've got an application presented to this committee where we've actually got a well-advanced Section 106. Members that have sat at this committee many times before will have heard that you may have then a delay after an endorsement at committee before a Section 106 has been signed. Members of this committee would have heard the Ashton Park application. That took 10 years to get through committee, and it was an outline application, so you've got a very significant delay there. What we've got here is Barrett's have taken a risk in terms of committing to pay the council's legal fees to get a Section 106 well advanced, in the hope that an application can be approved and then you don't have that delay after a committee endorsement. That's not to say that they can start work on site, because they would then have to come back with the Reserve Matters application as a follow-up application. But what I'm saying is you potentially would not have the same level of delays that we've seen many times before, where we've got a developer submit an application and then they'll say, yes, and we'll get on with the work as long as you give us an approval. What they've done here is actually pay for that legal requirement and get the Section 106 well advanced. Following on from what we've heard from Councillor Carbon in terms of the wider impacts, just as a refresher from what I said earlier about legal requirements. When we've got an application and there's a requirement for developer contributions, 3 legal tests must be met. And it's not reasonable to impose a requirement on any developer to resolve wider impacts. They can certainly be required to provide betterment, which they have done in this case through what Verity has confirmed through consultees looking to provide the betterment on site, the highway improvement works, various contributions to improve local area connections, including the towpath, for a very significant sum of 230,000 or thereabouts. That's a very significant improvement for a local area. What this developer cannot be imposed upon as a burden is to require them to resolve the other issues that exist in terms of the flooding of the local river when the local road when the Avon floods. That's a wider issue for this council, quite frankly, to look at what we as a council could potentially do to improve that situation. But separate to the developer contributions, just as a reminder, developers also have to pay SIL receipts. And that is, in this case, split, because Hilperton have got a made neighbourhood plan, so they would get 25% of the total SIL receipt sum, and it would be up to Hilperton to decide how best they see that money being spent locally. The rest of the money is for the Wiltshire Council to pull that together, identify what is the critical local environmental scheme that would deliver improvement for local residents and our local communities. It's not for the developer to provide all the answers. We've got a responsibility, and when we approve developments, it's not just Section 106 money, it's also SIL receipts. And for a scheme of 180 houses, it's not an insubstantial sum of money that would come through. I can't give you the full total because we would get that at the Reserve Matter stage when we've got a fixed number of houses, and then it's quite easy to do the calculation in terms of how much a developer would be obligated to pay. You've heard from Verity in terms of what the NPPF is very clear on when a council has a shortage of housing land supply. And whilst that doesn't mean that every site should be highly dense, overdeveloped schemes, Just as a reminder, we've got a follow-up application should this outline be approved, and that's the Reserve Matters application, and that would be potentially presented to this committee for the detailed matters to be considered. Picking up a point that I think a local resident made, that design is never refused at committee. That's not the case. I can't remember who quite said that, but Councillor Carbon will know full well that we had a case, a Reserve Matters application presented to this committee for a scheme in Holt. This committee refused it. So we do, as a council, take Reserve Matters applications very seriously, and if they're unacceptable, then they can be refused. But that would be for a future application stage to look at the layout, the design, how it fits in as a scheme and its impacts on neighbours in terms of overlooking and privacy aspects. That is a future application consideration. It's not something that's open for this council to determine at this stage, because it is purely the principle of development as well as the detailed aspect for the access to the site for vehicles. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, we now proceed to debate. I must admit, I have heard nothing really for me to change my my thoughts on this. But excuse me, I'm rummaging around a little bit here. Excuse me. Right, but Dr. Beckett mentioned perhaps a site visit might be worthwhile, and a member of this committee did mention it to me beforehand, so I'm wondering when I start whether to sort of see what the members of the committee think about that. But before I say anything else, could I, in all sincerity, thank Barrett Redrow for agreeing to defer this item from the 2nd of September when I would have been on holiday. To understand they're quite happy for the interest of democracy that it should be heard with a local member present, and I sincerely thank them for that and allowing me and the committee the chance to debate this properly. So thank you for that. And so I do have my sort of original speech here, but could I just have a quick look? Would there be any interest or any thoughts in a site visit? Well, so if I go to Councillor White and then Councillor Newbury.
Thank you, Chairman. It was I think, who suggested before that that's something that could be useful for us before making a decision. I'm minded that I live very close by, and if you visit this site, I understand the passion which the Hilperton Council have presented of many issues, particularly the traffic. And if we went to visit the site, I'm sure people would feel the same. My slight reservation is we've had highways who've offered no objection. So will a site visit make any difference in planning terms to this committee? I'm not sure, and I would like to ask my colleagues for any advice on that.
Thank you. Councillor Newbury, you've indicated.
Yeah, my thought was rather similar, Chairman. I mean, clearly we haven't heard from anybody today a strong, clear reason for refusal that they wanted us to adopt. I listened very carefully to Trevor Carbin, local member, highly experienced planning member going back with me 30 years. He said it would be great if we could refuse this. He didn't say, here's a reason you can refuse it on. Now, if we were to have a site visit, there would need to be a purpose for it. Either we would be moving towards a refusal, in which case somebody asking us to go on a site visit would need to say, I think, here is what I think might turn out to be a reason for refusal, and we could explore it on site. Or, picking up Councillor Trevor Carbin's point, there might be some way that this could be conditioned for a permission that would make it less harmful locally. And again, I think we'd want to be told in what way it might be possible to condition it and how going on site would help us to get the condition right. But simply to go on site for a site visit when we haven't yet heard anything like that we would be moving towards, I think we would be kidding people, really.
Thank you, Councillor Newbury. You've obviously got many years of experience of different planning committees, and I hear what you say. Councillor Hopkinson.
Excuse me, I've got the same complaint that you have. I agree with Councillor Newbury. It's a really difficult one because I would love for us to refuse this, but it will be overturned at appeal and we'd end up potentially losing money. I think Trevor's view was absolutely right. It's the way to protect the local community is by reserved matters and conditions. I do have one question, and that is, are reserved matters voted on here, or is that delegated to officers?
Thank you, Councillor. Chair, as we've discussed many times before, when a reserved matters application comes in, it's treated the same way as an outline application. It's subject to the local ward member decision to decide whether it should be presented to a committee. It may be one that could come to this committee, or within Councillor Clark's discretion, it could even be an area committee like the Holt case.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it was after this decision. Yeah, that's what I was getting. We didn't have to sit here for hours thrashing it out. Right.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you. And just to be clear, this is just my comment in regard to site visit. I'm reserving other matters till later. But just to say, I actually did do a site. I visited the site myself because I'm not so familiar with this area of the county. And personally, having done a 2-hour round trip and sat here for 2 hours for a meeting, I would be quite disappointed if we deferred. I think most councillors here are quite experienced. We had a very informative pack, and if we wanted a site visit, it was a very accessible site. I've walked along Maxcroft Lane, I've walked along Marsh Lane, I've observed the traffic and got a good sense of the landscape. So personally, I'm satisfied I've got the information I need, and I would be disappointed in some ways to find this was deferred to another meeting now.
Okay, thank you. I'll hear what you say. I must be, perhaps it's one of those things that I should have thought about calling a site visit beforehand, but it's an awkward thing being chairman and being the local member. From what the committee said, I'll go through what I'd proposed or what I'd prepared as a possible opening speech, depending on what I'd heard, and then perhaps we'll see where we go from that. And well, we'll go from there. I have tried to keep it to 5 minutes because I didn't want to sort of take liberties by going on for too long. So. This is obviously a very contentious application where tilted balance can be applied. I currently feel that the adverse impacts of development significantly and demonstrably outweigh any benefit. The landowner and Barrett Redrow have long had their eyes on developing this site. When the Hilperton Neighbourhood Development Plan was going through its preparation stage over 10 years ago, this site was offered for consideration for residential development and declined. The applicants now obviously see a window when they might be able to squeeze the LPA for permission. The site was considered under the Schlar scheme some years ago as Site 3541. The report stated, the site could offer the potential to the gateway to development of Sites 723 and 736 and for the coordinated provision of infrastructure, e.g. new schools, to serve all 3 sites, thereby supporting place-shaping priority. Subsequently, a landowner has refused to sell her land for development, and so the gateway potential to other land has been lost. This site must now be seen as an isolated, standalone development, offering no provision of any infrastructure whatsoever, and with no direct relationship to Trowbridge, and very little relationship to the village of Hilperton, being perched outside the settlement boundary on the northeastern corner of the settlement. This site is not even in the draft local plan, which is due to be considered by an inspector later this year. It has totally fallen off the radar, so to speak. I would remind you that Wiltshire Core Strategy Policy 5-150 says, it is recognised that the villages surrounding Trowbridge, particularly Hilperton, Southwick, North Bradley and West Ashton, have separate and distinct identities as villages. Open countryside should be maintained to protect the character and identity of these villages as separate communities. The local communities may wish to consider this matter in more detail in any future community-led neighbourhood planning. This development would conflict with this policy and, as mentioned earlier, was considered and rejected by Hilperton when the neighbourhood plan was submitted. I'm sure we can all remember the training sessions we received only a few months ago. At one of these, held in this very chamber, we were advised of 4 overall, in inverted commas, reasons while a planning application could be refused on balance. These were cumulative impact, sustainability, overdevelopment and character of the area. This application is contrary to all 4 of these parameters. Firstly, cumulative impact. Excuse me. Firstly, cumulative impact. This application is in addition to the 480 houses currently being constructed in Hilperton along Elizabeth Way, some of which are by Barratt. The Elizabeth Way development all provide 30% affordable housing. Hilperton does not currently require, need or want any additional housing. If extra houses are allocated in the local plan, they will not be on this site. The Elizabeth Way houses have already increased the number of houses in Hilperton by circa 25%. The officer's report acknowledges that data reveals Hilperton as having a residual housing figure of 3 as at 1st of August 2023, i.e. before the Elizabeth Way houses were constructed. Second, sustainability. This site cannot be classed as sustainable. The officer's report makes various comments on what is available within a 30-minute walk. The report fails to say that anything north of Staverton will involve walking along country lanes with no footpaths. Reference is made to 2 schools. One is a primary school, the other, bizarrely, is a private school. No mention is made of the Cross Trowbridge journey, possibly about 2 miles, to reach any of the existing secondary schools, all of which will undoubtedly be undertaken by car. How can this be sustainable? I find it particularly ironic that reference is made to a petrol station being within walking distance. I presume this is to enable residents to fill jerry cans for their cars. The nearest bus stop to gain access to Trowbridge is about a 20-minute walk. In all honesty, who is going to walk that far for a half-hourly, daytime-only bus service rather than jump in their car? The Sunday bus service is even less frequent. Again, is this what Wiltshire Council regards as sustainable? Thirdly, overdevelopment. As already mentioned, Hilperton has grown by about 25% in the last few months. Figures show that the village does not need another 180 homes, and being so far from Trowbridge, these houses cannot realistically be classed as Trowbridge. Residents will have no reason to use either the nighttime economy or the shops of the town. Finally, character of the area. The objection to this scheme by the Wiltshire Council Landscape Officer, which is in section 7, page 12, is given scant reference in the report. Amongst the officer's comments, she or he states that the application is not being characteristic of the sparse existing development located in the proximal context of the site and the urbanising impact this will have on the non-designated heritage asset of the Kennet-Laven Canal and views across the site from public right-of-way STAV 3 and National Cycle Route 4. They go on to state, additional trees will not mitigate the loss of openness that the site provides or mitigate the development expansion this site would represent into the rural countryside north of Marsh Road and outside the settlement boundary. Perhaps most importantly, the report states, on receipt of the revised drawings, the Council's Landscape Officer confirmed that their objections remain in place. I think that within about 5 minutes, which is all I've allowed myself, is sufficient for my views on this. And I'd like to put the following as a proposal. I have sent a copy of this to the clerk, so she has it there. Now, obviously, obviously at the end of this, I'll see whether I can have a second for it. The development as proposed would materially conflict with the Council's strategic core policies CP1, CP2, CP29 and CP51 of the adopted Wiltshire Core Strategy, as well as significantly and demonstrably conflicting with the Hilperton Neighbourhood Development Plan, and that the benefits of the development would not outweigh the aforesaid plan conflicts, and that this application and that the application is hereby refused in full compliance with the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 11, D2. And I'll seek a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Brashkin. So that is on the table and it is open to debate. And I'll throw it open to members. Councillor Newbury.
Chairman, as I understood it from the officer, we can't use the neighbourhood plan argument because this just doesn't fit within the terms of paragraph 14 of the NPPF. Can we hear from officers on that?
Yeah, I think with respect, the chairman didn't actually refer to paragraph 14, he referred to paragraph 11D2, which is the tilted balance. So Councillor Clark is arguing that the application, the harms would outweigh the benefits. So whereas paragraph 14, the balance is twisted. So he's not, am I correct in thinking that you're not running the argument that the development is contrary to paragraph 14 of the NPPF? The argument is that it's contrary to paragraph 11D2.
Okay, but if it's about the tilted balance in paragraph 11D2, I mean, the officers have made the case as to why the tilted balance runs in favour of the development. Oh, well, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Newbury. I'll look for any further comment. Crumbs. Oh, no.
So thank you very much. I'm just conscious my first opportunity speaking in strategic planning was a situation quite like this, where I came as chair of my parish council and spoke about a not dissimilar proposal in my division. And so this is one which I've thought about very carefully. As I said, I've been and have had a good look at the site, and I've read with interest everything which the parish council had said. And I'm very sympathetic to a lot of the arguments about respect for local planning, neighbourhood plan, landscape. But the difference between when I came here and spoke and where we are now is the fact that the change to the housing land supply means we have to operate on this tilted balance. And I'm just very conscious as councillors, if we just go with our hearts, all we do for residents is we delay a clear decision being made and then lead to it getting overturned at appeal, which will give the council costs, or will have the same effect, but will prolong residents' agony. And so we have to be able to make the argument in terms of the tilted balance, or not at all. And so just going through and thinking about how we weigh some of those things on the balance and trying to do the same exercise which Councillor Clark has done, I actually reach a different conclusion, I'm afraid. So on the issue of local planning, this is made somewhat easier by the fact that this site isn't in the local plan for me, because if it was in the local plan, then the argument about prematurity would arise. But since it isn't, this is very clearly a speculative application. It wouldn't be in the neighbourhood plan, but local plan, but we have to ask, we need additional housing. How does this fit in? And how does this meet the need? And how suitable a site is this to meet that housing need? In terms of issues around separation of communities, this doesn't fill the buffers between the communities, for instance, of Hilperton and Staverton, as far as I can see. And the issues of flooding, I've listened very carefully to the officers' advice, and they appear to be addressed, and our experts seem to conclude that this will not cause worse issues of flooding for surrounding neighbours, and the houses themselves will not be vulnerable. In terms of highways, I have every sympathy with what's being said, and I know roads like this in my division as well, and this absolutely is not saying this is fine and we should live with this, but what this is saying is that probably a planning decision is not the way to address it, because as we heard from the expert, the number of houses from this development are not going to have a significant effect on the traffic flows for us to be able to give weight to that in the decision making, at least in my opinion. I think we've heard some really strong arguments, and I hope, especially since the S106 is still live, even if advanced, that some of the things about footways and footpaths to halt can be considered still in that discussion. And in terms of sites, if we are to build houses, this site seems more sustainable and accessible than many would be. There is a small convenience shop in the garage right opposite. There is a Lidl which is within walking distance of the site should one want to walk to a Lidl. And it definitely doesn't seem to take you over the problematic bridge if you choose to drive so. So for me, the only issue is landscape, which is the one which could be looked at, which could tip the weight. And I think even looking at landscape officers' recommendations, it's a moderate harm, and from my unexpert eye, I would agree with that. It's largely sheltered at the moment from Marsh Road, so there's not large rolling open vistas from Marsh Road at the moment. and it is a flat landscape, not a rising one, so housing built on it will not be dominating. So I would tend to concur with the officer's decision that it's moderate. And so while I recognise there is harm, for me, unfortunately, when we have to operate this tilting balance, that moderate harm does not offset the very substantial advantages in terms of housing delivery, particularly. So I'm afraid in this case, I can't support your reasoning, Councillor Clark, and that's with great regret.
No worries at all, Councillor Baker. Is there anybody else wishes to speak? Councillor Parman.
Yeah, I think Councillor Baker came up with roughly what I wanted to say. And in the past, normally I just vote without really explaining my rationale behind it. And since the last meeting, there was a little bit of criticism of that people have come all the way in here and put across their ideas that the rationale behind which way we do go should be explained. I think Mr. Councillor Baker covered most of the things I'd like to say, but I think from my perspective, it would always be better that we are using brownfield sites and that we are closer to the centre. In my ward, I have the Inox Mills site, a massive site that we have done everything we can to try to get developers to develop. To the point now we have good planning permission for that, but it is not getting developed yet. In that it's a more expensive site than greenfield sites. We have to consider this one. This has come forward, and the traffic increase is proportionally is not going to have a major effect. I think on sustainability, yes, I'd like the houses close to the centre of Trowbridge, so they could use that. But the way it's being represented here gives the I don't understand how anybody can live in Hilperton Marsh at the moment. And so, you know, they're managing fine with that. This is a proportional increase. And I think, you know, the benefits clearly outweigh the negatives to this. I think the SUDS development looks really good. 3 ponds added there. There's a lot more trees. The biodiversity is improving. It looks, from my perspective, to be a good little development which helps address our housing needs. Is the character of the village of Hilperton. This is opposite Hilperton Marsh and to Staverton by the bridge there. The housing round there is not the village of Hilperton. So I don't feel it's changing the overall characteristic there in a hugely negative way. So I can't support Councillor Clark on this one.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'll look around for any other. Councillor Braskin.
Thank you, Chair. It is a very, very difficult one, but I am still, like the Chair, I am still not convinced. The cumulative effect of all these houses and where we're putting them, we're not doing ourselves any favour. We have to challenge. There must be other brownfield sites, things like that, and everything else. To me, I know that particular area. Although I'm Southwick, and I've more than on many occasions had the frustration of the highways site of there, and it is quite difficult. Yes, we heard from the highways to say, oh, it's only a little bit more, but there is the expression, the straw that broke the camel's back. It doesn't take much for lots and lots of disruption, etc. And sustainability, I also agree very, very strongly with that, because there is nothing there. And we can't keep on using up good land. Yes, it's not the best quality land, but building houses where actually it's not the best place to put them. You know, that's my view anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Final look round. Okay, as the move of the motion, I will sum up and then we will go immediately to the vote. Sustainability, obviously I disagree with those that have spoken against me for obvious reasons, but it's good that you have, because at least we can see that the committee does have 2 views. I'll just point out that during the recall there's 166,000 back movements on this area. We're not talking about a field that has 1 or 2 bats whizzing across it once or twice a night. 166,000 recordings, 14 different species, and all 4 of the Annex 2 bats use this area for feeding and for foraging and for crossing. This council adopted the new bat policy only a couple of months ago. I understand that not every member of this committee would agree with that policy, but the fact remains that you argue against the policy before it's adopted. Once it's adopted, whether we like it or not, or speaking in generic terms, whether we like it or not, once the policy is adopted by this council, that is the policy that this committee or all members of the council have to go to. Stuart, so there's no debate here. So, as I say, this field, or this area, is heavily used by bats, including Annex 2, the protected ones. Somebody mentioned about going to appeals and costs and everything. I would point out that a couple of months ago, we refused an application in the Melksham area, and a member of the committee at that time did ask, what is the point of this committee? The point of this committee is that when we get an application that we don't think is appropriate, we refuse it. If the applicant decides to take it to appeal, that is absolutely up to them, and the council will fight it. Undoubtedly, if this is refused, I'm sure Barrett's, rather than stepping back from it, will take it to appeal, but that is their right. It was mentioned about development cost of greenfield land. With the greatest of respect, development cost is nothing to do with this committee. We have nothing to do with the viability of sites or anything. We consider every site on what's put in front of us and how we compare it to our policies. And this really looks like, I think it was the leader of the Conservative group used to refer to, or does refer to these sort of developments as cookie cutters. It is not in the middle of Hilperton Village. It's not even in the developed part of it. As has been said, it's up on the edge of Hilperton Marsh. It's undeveloped. The landscape officer of Wiltshire Council is dead against this. And this seems an ideal situation where we should support the officer and refuse this application. So, as I say, the motion is on the table, it's been seconded, it's been debated, I've summed it up, so I will now go immediately to the vote. So those in favour of the motion, which is for refusal, please show.
1, 2.
Those against?
1, sorry, it's only committee members. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So that falls, and there is nothing on the table, so I'll throw it open to the committee. Councillor Parman.
I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Baker. Okay, I'll open that to debate. Okay, well, I'll throw my 2 pence in. Could I just suggest that the number of houses is reduced? Because we're, again, I don't know who the housing officer was that made the report, but he or she very glibly says, oh, that's the number that's, or that's the density that's been agreed for houses on Elizabeth Way. For those of us that have been on the committee for a while, you may remember that the number that the inspector said for Elizabeth Way was far lower. It steadily increased. And when one came to this committee, an ex-head of planning actually had the front to stand here and say, well, the more you permit here, the less you'll get somewhere else, which is obviously turned out to be a load of rubbish. But for any housing officer to say that this site should have the same density as something that, let's be honest, the houses on Elizabeth Way will end up in Trowbridge within a few years. They've been built on the edge of Trowbridge, they're west of the Relief Road, and I'm sure the Town Council is going to apply under the next phase to get them transferred. So I'd like to suggest that the density should go down to 100 to a maximum of 110 houses on this site. I don't know if there'd be a seconder to put that through as a formal amendment.
Could we hear from officers about whether that's an achievable condition?
Defer to the legal expert.
Sorry, Chair.
Could I just say that if it's legal, costs are irrelevant to this committee. We're not here to decide whether anything's viable.
I'm not going to talk about costs, Chair. You just said yourself, Chair, that what the committee's function is to determine the application before it. The application is for 180 houses. You either grant or refuse an application for up to 180 houses, you can't amend the description of development on the hoops.
Sorry, I don't want to get into an argument with you, but are you telling me that this committee cannot amend a condition of a planning application?
You can impose what conditions, what reasonable conditions you choose. What you can't do is change the description of the development, which is for up to 180 houses.
That's a very interesting topic that you've raised there, because I'm sure we've done it in the past. But, Anyway, I'll stand. Councillor Freeman.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from with that, Chair, but we do have to look at the application that we've got in front of us, which is, in this case, 180 houses. The financial viability assessment, the Section 106 agreements, the amount of money that's been agreed through the Section 106 agreements, everything would be thrown up in the air. The applicant would have to look at the whole thing all over again if that was the case. So we do have to look at the 180 houses we have in front of us as it is. One thing I am going to suggest, though, is that a number of issues have been raised today, which I think warrant further consideration. You will have heard me many times complain about the determination of our highways officers, and not for the first time, I think the highways officers have got this wrong, but we can't do a great deal about that. As it stands at the moment, I am often disappointed by what the highways come out with, and this is another example of that. But Trevor has mentioned, Councillor Carbon's mentioned a few issues. There are things that have come up through debate, and on page 123 it mentions about reserve matters, 124, future reserve matters application to assess. And I think Kenny kind of alluded to where the reserve matters may go. And I would like to urge that the reserve matters, when that comes in, do come back to a committee, because I think that's a reasonable request. And I think there are a few issues that have been raised today. I don't think, personally, we can refuse this application, but I do think there are things, more detailed stuff that needs to be looked at more closely. So I would ask that it come to a committee anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Councillor Freeman. I have had a word with Kenny as the meeting has gone on, and I think it would be fair to say that if this is approved, then the reserve matters will come back either before strategic or possibly Western Area Planning Committee. Is that?
It'd be a poll, Jim. It'd be a poll.
Right, as local member?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other... Sorry, Councillor Newbury.
Well, just a word about the highway issues, Chairman, if I may. I mean, we heard from Councillor Broughtingham that this was the straw that breaks the camel's back, that it's obvious that there must be some adverse impact. And of course, he's right. It is obvious that there must be some adverse impact. Councillor Greenman may be right that the highway officers have got this wrong. But we as a committee, if we want to refuse this on highway grounds, we don't have to show a slight adverse impact or some adverse impact. We have to show a severe adverse impact. And that is it's one of the many ways in which successive governments have got us under their thumb. But that is the rule that we have to comply with. And if we were to want to refuse this on highway grounds, we would have to show a severe highway impact. And we haven't got that from our own officers' work. And so if somebody wanted us to refuse it on that ground, they would need to come up with a professional report by a suitably qualified highway engineer to say, Wiltshire Council's got this wrong, there is a severe highway impact, and this is how and why we're able to demonstrate it. And if objectors want us to refuse things, major schemes like this, I think the penny has to drop, that we are completely between a rock and a hard place unless we have the evidence of professionally sort of studied reports to show that we can get there. So highway reasons just won't float here, Chairman, I'm afraid.
No, thank you, Councillor Newby. I must admit, much as I don't hate to agree with you, but I hate to agree with what you're saying. Obviously, I have been in contact with the planning officers over this matter. And as you say, unless somebody had gone out to pay, because we've had applications in Hilton where an objector has got deep enough pockets to go out to planning officers and God knows who else and come up with a professional report. As you say, we are in the position where we may or may not think it is bad, but it is not what our highways officer has told, or our highways officers have told us. And so, as you say, we really can't run it, because if we refused it, I know I'm speaking against really what I believe, but if we were to refuse this on highway grounds, we'd get taken off to appeal, and I hate to say it, we'd get hammered for costs, because we haven't got the sort of the backing for it. No, I hate to agree with you, Christopher, but just so the committee is aware. Is there anybody else wishes to? Councillor Green.
I'll just come back on that very quickly. Yeah, I'll just be very clear. We've already decided we're not going to refuse this application, so that isn't appropriate. That's not relevant at this point that's just been made. I just don't like the highways, what the highways officers have said, and I don't agree with it. But that's by the by now. I absolutely agree. It needs to be much more robust if we were going to refuse it on those grounds. So, just wanted to clarify where I was coming from with this one. We're now looking, of course, at the recommendation to approve this.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chairman. As ever, we speak with one voice on the matter. In all seriousness, is there anybody else wishes to debate what's on the table, which is permission per the agenda? No, if not, I shall go back to the mover and seek your summing up, after which we'll go immediately to vote.
I don't think I'll add anything.
Nothing to add. Okay, we go immediately to vote. Those in favour of the proposal, which is permission per the agenda papers, please show.
Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And those against?
2.
Okay. Well, as chairman, I'm happy to say that is passed. As a local member, I'm not so keen, but the official decision of Wiltshire Council is that has permission. Right, moving on through the agenda. I don't think there's an awful lot there. Debate, urgent items, we have none.
Oh, yes, if that's okay. Yeah, so so is it okay? Yeah, so there's a possibility that the date of the next strategic planning will change from Wednesday, the 22nd of October to Thursday, the 23rd. That's because it's full council the day before, which is going to be long. So we thought we'd give you all a break in between full council and the next strategic. But we will confirm that by updating invites if that is the case. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Tara. Thank you to members of the public, parish councils, Councillor Carbin, committee members, applicants, and we'll see you, or some of you, at the next meeting